especially Ricky Skaggs on the mandolin this morning. As a bluegrass fan, I am always thrilled to hear a mandolin playing. I have said before that I'm one that consistently, and it still rings true, I'm one that consistently drives the speed limit. And I say consistently, I don't mean perfectly, because sometimes I'm just not paying enough attention, or I get kind of caught up in the flow of traffic and I'm exceeding the posted speed limit. But those occasions are comparatively rare. Most of the time I'm driving the speed limit. But if you are riding with me, there are ways that you can tell, and Caroline can attest to this, there are ways that you can tell if I'm speeding and never even look at the speedometer. So let me set the stage for you. Let's say you are riding with me and you're in my car and we're headed towards downtown on Wendover. We've passed the car dealerships, and Wendover essentially at that point is expressway. I mean, there's some exits, but there's no stoplights for a series of miles, and the speed limit is what? 45. That stinks, right? It ought to be 55. Yes, I see that hand. Anyway, so it's 45 through there, and Greensboro Police Department likes to watch that strip through there and write a slew of tickets. And so anyway, you're going with me. We're headed down Wendover. Speed limit's 45. But you're aware also, if you're driving 45 down that section of Wendover, you're kind of like Magoo out there, right? And cars are passing you on both sides. And so sometimes just to keep up with the flow of traffic or just to get people off of your back bumper, you'll start speeding up. All right, so let's say we're going along, and I'm not paying a whole lot of attention to my speed, and let's say I'm going 53 miles an hour. Well, that's not crazy or anything, but it's 8 miles over the speed limit. That's enough to get you a ticket. And so let's say we're headed down, and over on the left side where it kind of breaks and there's a median, there's some trees over there. You might have seen them before. Greensboro Police Department motorcycles like to tuck themselves up underneath there. Let's say we see one of those, or maybe it's one of those blasted unmarked Suburbans. You've seen those things? Police should not be able to drive something that doesn't look at all like a police car. And so they've got one of those Suburbans parked over on the shoulder so that you think it's a disabled vehicle. But as soon as I know what it is, and I recognize, oh, they're out here, they've got their radar guns going. And so immediately I'm going to do two things, one conscious, one subconscious. I'm going to let off the gas, and then I'm going to do this. I'm going to rub my leg. I have no idea why. I'm not telling myself you need to do this, but I'm going to let off the gas and I'm going to start to rub my leg. I have no idea why it is I do that. I don't necessarily intend to do that. I just do that. If I'm driving along, if I'm exceeding the speed limit and I see a police officer, I'm going to let off the gas and I'm going to start to rub my leg. I guess ultimately when push comes to shove, it's a subconscious expression of guilt that I'm feeling. Because I know I'm doing something that shouldn't be done. I'm exceeding the posted speed limit. I'm fearful of getting a ticket, and so this guilt is prompting me to do that. It's a little odd, maybe, a little strange, but that's what I do. You have experienced, and I have experienced, expressions of guilt, though, that are far more consequential than, rubbing your leg. Maybe you have done something, there's a sin that you have committed, and the guilt over it caused you to have difficulty going to sleep at night. Maybe what it was that you did towards someone or what it was that you said, it caused you to avoid them. You'd see them coming and you duck in another room so that you wouldn't have to look them in the eye. Or maybe it was that there were opportunities that presented themselves, but because of the weight of the guilt you were feeling, you just said, no, I'm not going to do that. Long story short, you and I know this, and it requires me not having to tell you. You know from experience, guilt stinks, doesn't it? It feels miserable. It does not at all feel good. Here's our question this morning, though. Why does it feel so bad? I mean, why does guilt feel so lousy? Well, I think the Bible answers that question for us in ways that are instructive. Look with me in Genesis 43. Genesis 43, and we're picking up our walk through, and we're nearing the end of our study of Joseph's life. We're in verse 15, is where we're going to drop in, of Genesis 43. Genesis 43, verse 15. All right, so again, our question is this. Why is it that guilt causes us to feel so miserable? What is it that it's doing that makes us feel so bad? Why is it so lousy? Well, based on what we're going to see this morning, I believe there's a few reasons, and the first is this. Guilt causes our imaginations to go wild. Guilt causes our imaginations to go wild. Let's get the stage back in our mind as to what's going on. You recall Joseph is the prime minister now of Egypt. He's number 2 in the entire nation. A famine is going on that's affected not merely Egypt, but the surrounding nations. And were it not for the prudence of Joseph during years of abundance and plenty, they wouldn't have had all the surplus to be able to save. And so they saved this, and because of that, the people of Egypt are not starving. Not only are they not starving, but the surrounding nations that are also affected by this famine, they're making their way to Egypt to buy grain and to get food so that they won't starve. And you recall that back in Canaan, Joseph's family, his father and his brothers that were there, that they've run out of food. And Jacob sends the brothers, with the exception of Benjamin, to Egypt to buy some grain. Well, it just so happens that they go to the exact place where Joseph happens to be, at one of the dispensary sites, and they don't recognize him. It's been 20 years since they've seen him, and he's dressed as an Egyptian leader. He's speaking a different language. They just don't recognize him, but Joseph knows exactly who they are. And he begins a conversation with them, and why he does this we're not told, but Joseph, and he knows the truth about this, but he accuses them of being spies. And they say, oh, no, we're not spies at all. We're all brothers. We're from Canaan. Our father sent us here, all of the brothers, well, except for one. Our youngest, he's back at home with Daddy, but we came, all we're doing is we're here to get grain. And Joseph says, no, you're spies. Oh, no, we're not. We're not, I promise. And so Joseph says, listen, this is what you're going to have to do. To prove that you are not spies, I'm requiring of you is that one of the brothers, in this case it was going to be Simeon, is going to be held as a deposit in prison in Egypt while the rest of the brothers head back to Canaan and they get Benjamin, the youngest, in return. At that point, that'll demonstrate beyond any question that they are in fact telling the truth, that they are not in fact spies. And so as they hear this, back in verse 21 of chapter 42, they're talking amongst themselves, and this is what they said. Remember this. We are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. Now, again, they have no idea that this is Joseph, their own flesh and blood in front of them. They haven't thought about what they did to him, plotting to kill him, selling him as a slave, covering it up and telling their father that he'd been attacked and killed by an animal. They hadn't thought about that for 20 years. 2 decades have passed, and they've suppressed all those feelings of guilt and those bad feelings over what they have done. They haven't thought about that for 20 years, but now it's on the front burner of their mind, and they're looking at these awful circumstances and these allegations, and they're saying, we're experiencing this because of what we did 20 years ago to Joseph. It's all coming back to haunt us. Maybe even thinking God's trying to get us. So they've got no choice. They have to leave Simeon there. They're going to leave Egypt, but they do so with sacks of grain that they have purchased. They pay money for the grain. They head out of town, but they don't know that Joseph has ordered that the money be tucked back in one of the sacks of grain. On the way back, they open one of the sacks of grain, the money's in there. They're like, oh no. Now, we've been accused of being spies, and we paid for this. Now the money's been returned. They're going to be accusing us of burglary spies. Not only those that come to snoop to get information, but those that steal things. We're in a terrible spot at this point. And so they're feeling guilt over the returned money, but they're feeling guilt over the returned money because of what they had done to Joseph. All right, so they get back home. They get back home and they tell their father, Jacob, hey, this is what this Egyptian bigwig told us, and if we don't show back up with Benjamin, Simeon's going to rot in an Egyptian prison. Jacob, hearing this, says, well, he's not going anywhere. You guys are all staying here. Nobody's headed back to Egypt. So for a while, it's a settled issue until they run out of food again. And Jacob at this point realizes, I don't have any choice. And so he sends all the brothers, including Benjamin, back to Egypt with the hope of securing Simeon's release. Well, that's where we pick up today. And we get to verse 16 of this passage. And they've gotten back to Egypt, and they approach where Joseph is. Verse 16 says, when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my home, slaughter an animal, and make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon. So they've just shown back up. Joseph sees them. He sees Benjamin with them, and he tells his steward, his assistant, hey, take these guys back to my place. Start getting lunch ready. We're going to be eating a big feast today at noon. Verse 17, the man did as Joseph ordered, and the man brought Joseph's brothers into Joseph's house. Verse 18 tells us the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house. And they said to each other, it's because of the money. It's because of the money, which was returned in our sacks the first time, that we brought in, so that he may make a case against us and seize us, take us as slaves with our donkeys. All right, do you see what's going on? They're being taken to Joseph's home, and you got to recognize that this isn't going to be just like in a two-bedroom apartment. This is going to be a palace. He's the prime minister of Egypt, the most amazing dwelling that these guys have ever seen, and they're being taken there for lunch. And the guys are like, I don't know about all this. I thought we were just going to show up and repay the money and get Simeon out, but now they're taking us to his house. Wait a minute. Again, verse 18 tells us that they were afraid, and what they began to think is, okay, they're bringing us here. We're going to have lunch, but it's not really a lunch. It's going to be an inquisition. They're going to interrogate us, and after the interrogation, they're going to seize our animals. They're going to throw us in the jail until such time they can sell us as slaves. That's what's going to happen. Now, do you realize what's going on? They've gotten a dinner invitation, and they've concluded, we're going to finish the day as slaves. How's that for an imagination? Suppose I invite you over for supper on tomorrow night. Are you going to, between now and then, think, okay, my car is going to be seized and I'm going to be sold as a slave on the sex market somewhere? Are you going to come up with that? It seems kind of strange, almost bizarre, that they're going to do this, but what's going on? They're feeling guilty again initially over what they've done to Joseph. That spawns guilt over the money, and now their imaginations have kicked into overdrive so that they believe we're going to be interrogated, we're going to be arrested, our animals taken, and we're going to be sold as slaves. When in truth, what's happened? They've been invited for lunch. But they come away with all of this. Why? Because of their imaginations. But what was kicking the imagination into gear? The guilt that they were feeling. In truth, that's exactly what guilt does to us. That's one of the reasons it makes us so miserable, is that it causes our imaginations to just go crazy. You've heard me mention before my friend Alan, and years ago when both of us were single, we didn't have anything else to do, and so one of the things we would on a regular basis do was to go see movies. And there were a couple of theaters in particular that we would frequent, and at one of these theaters, I had noticed that the staff there used walkie-talkies that weren't commercial grade. These were the types that you could see or find at Target or Best Buy or anywhere else that sells, walkie-talkies for your family. Well, I noticed that, and I also knew I had one of those walkie-talkies, and Alan has one of those walkie-talkies, and we weren't bad guys, but we're in for a little bit of fun. And so I told Alan, I said, next time let's bring our walkie-talkies. And so that's exactly what we did. And we got to the theater, and I start scanning through the channels, and I find which channel they're on. At this point, and I think we'd already watched the movie. We've come out, and we're just going to have a little bit of fun. So we start calling stuff in. Say somebody spilled a drink all over the carpet in Theater 8. So, Becky, go get that. And so you hear the exchange between them as they're starting to respond to this. Oh, no, there's a fight in Theater 11. Somebody's smoking a cigarette in 12. And so all of this stuff that we're calling out, and we're watching them begin to run to these various theaters. And finally, they're going in, and they're not finding any of the stuff they've heard on the radio. And I hear one of them say to another over the radio, I think somebody's got a radio, and they're messing with us. Well, duh. Somebody's got a radio, and they're messing with us. You know what? That's exactly what guilt does. It messes with you. It causes you to begin to think things are as they are not, to perceive situations very differently from how they are. Again, they've been invited to lunch. They've decided we're going to be sold as slaves. Why? Because of guilt at work. And guilt causes your imagination to just go wild. When you find yourself experiencing guilt over unconfessed, unresolved, undealt with sin, it's going to cause your mind to start to mess with you. And you're going to begin to wonder at every circumstance, is this God trying to get me? I need to stay away from this person. I hope that I'm not discovered. I hope this isn't disclosed. And you have all these scenarios going on in your mind that just aren't. Why? Because your imagination's going crazy. Feels lousy. That's exactly what guilt does. It causes your imagination to go wild, but it does something else. It causes your confession to get misdirected. Guilt makes us miserable because it causes our confession to get misdirected. All right, you've got the brothers. They're feeling terrible. They're racked with guilt over what they've done to Joseph. That's compiled by guilt they feel over the money, about the grain. They're headed towards Joseph's house, and they think that this is going to be their final lunch. And they've decided in their minds, because of their imagination, all of this doom and gloom is headed their way. They don't know what to do. They're running through the options. They're running through these various scenarios. Verse 19, it says, when they drew to the steward of Joseph's house, they talked with him at the door of the house. So they're getting ready to go in, and they've been, as best they can, talking among each other. What are we going to do? This is what's going to happen. Oh, I don't know. This is going to happen. And, well, how can we get out of this? What can we say? What can we do? And they're feeling so terrible. And before they go in, they know once that door closes, we're goners. So before the door opens, hey, time out just a second. And they say to the steward something. Starting in verse 20, they said, "Oh, sir, indeed, we came down the first time to buy food." Verse 21, "But it happened when we came to the encampment that we opened our sacks, and there each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, so we brought it back in our hand." So they're trying to stop this train before it goes off the bridge. So they're saying, hey, this is what happened. We didn't mean to, we intended to pay, but the money that we gave somehow wound up back in our banks, and we've shown back up not only to buy more grain, but to pay you for that. We do not know who put the money in our sacks. So what are they doing? Well, they're confessing. They're confessing because they're feeling this guilt. But what's interesting is this. Who are they confessing to? To the steward. They're not talking to Joseph. They're not talking to somebody in charge. They're talking to the guy that's going to cook lunch. And there's nothing wrong with that, but this, in dealing with a circumstance like this is entirely above and beyond his pay grade. This is not a decision maker. This is not a mover and a shaker. This is a guy that uses salt and pepper shakers, right? This is not somebody that needs to be hearing this. They're confessing because they feel so guilty, but they're confessing to the steward, to the butler. They're not saying this type of thing to Joseph, but in truth, that's how guilt works. We have done something, we have committed a particular sin or misdeed, and we feel so terrible about it, and our imaginations are making us feel lousy, and we want to get this off of our chest. We want to tell somebody, but in truth, telling the one that we have offended or communicating with the one that we've sinned against, we don't want to do that. We don't want to look that person in the eye. We don't want to be that candid. We want some relief. We want to somehow get this off of our chest. We've got to tell somebody, but we just don't tell the right one. Now, this type of thing happens in our lives on a regular basis. I remember the summer of my sophomore year in college. As summer was approaching, I began to look for a summer job. And the job that I wanted, I knew this lady at our church. She worked for a local BB&T, and I'd spoken to her, and she had said, a lot of times we hire some folks over the summer just to help out in the branch. And I thought, I think that would be a good job. It would give me some experience that I might not otherwise get. Might be a helpful opportunity to pursue. So I'd had the conversations, and all we were waiting for was approval beyond the branch for the manager to be able to hire this position. But days passed, weeks passed, the summer has now begun, and I still haven't heard anything. I really need to get a job for this summer. I had another guy in my church. He worked for Carolinas Medical Center, and CMC's got a big temporary agency filling all kinds of, thousands of jobs throughout their enormous system. And he had told me about this position with a division of CMC called Life Share of the Carolinas. It's an organ tissue transplant division. And I think they needed somebody to help out in the office, answer some phones, kind of office manager type stuff during the course of the summer while somebody was on maternity leave. And I went through the application process, and I had my first day. I've gone out there. Once I get to the office, I fill out all the necessary paperwork. I answer the phones. I do whatever it is that they wanted me to do that first day. It's not what I wanted to do. I was hoping for a job at the bank, but this is the door that opened. I get home that afternoon, and there's a message on the answering machine. It's from the branch manager of BB&T, and she said, "Well, good news. Finally got approval, and if you would, just call me back, and we'll talk about when you can start." And so I called her, and she answered the phone, and she said, "Yeah, we got the approval. If you can start tomorrow, we'll see you tomorrow morning." "Okay, yeah, I'll see you in the morning." Click. Yeah. Needed a job, got 2 jobs, not going to work out so well. And I've just told her I'm going to be there in the next morning, so I've got to communicate to the Life Share of the Carolinas after just one day. But it was a really good day. I was a really good worker that day. I've got to communicate to them, thanks, but no thanks, after just one day. No problems or anything. And so I feel terrible about this. I am dreading this. My blood pressure goes up. Just the very thought of it causes sweat on my brow, and I'm just so anxious about this. I didn't sleep well that night because I knew at that point, it was well after 5, the boss supervisor, there's nobody I can reach until morning. I get up the next morning, though, and I know I've got to get in touch with somebody. I've got to tell them, "Hey, I'm not going to be there. Thanks, but no thanks. It was a pleasure working with you." All this kind of stuff. I'm dreading this, and I just feel awful about this. But I've got to be at the bank by a certain time. So finally, I called the number, and the relief I felt when I discovered it was the answering service, not an answering machine, but the answering service. I'm actually talking to a person. And so I spoke to them, and I said, "Listen, this is Michael Owens, and if you would let so-and-so know, I've actually accepted another position with the bank. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I apologize if this creates any inconvenience for you. Essentially, thanks, but no thanks type of thing. If you could pass that on." I felt so relieved. But in truth, had I really done the right thing? Now, I really hadn't. Would I encourage my boys to do that? No, I really wouldn't. I would say you need to talk to the one that's in charge. But I didn't want to do that because I felt so guilty over what I was doing. I didn't want to look them in the eye. I didn't want to have a personal conversation with them. I was thrilled to talk with the answering service. "Hey, if you just pass that on, whew, now I feel so much better." I wanted the guilt to go away. I wanted those feelings to go away. And so what did I do? I confess, I let the answering service know. Joseph's brothers are feeling miserable, horrible, unmitigated guilt over what they've done. They want to tell somebody. They want to get this off of their chest, and what do? They confess to the steward. In truth, we have, and you probably already at this point or at some point in the future will find yourself being vexed in your soul over something that you have done. Maybe it's towards a person, maybe it's towards a family member, a co-worker, a classmate, or maybe it doesn't necessarily affect any of those people, but it's against God, and you just feel absolutely terrible about this. And you feel so bad, and you want that to go away, and you think one of the ways I can do this is just to relieve the pressure by telling someone. But so many times what we will do is to have our confession get misdirected. We'll tell somebody just to get it off our chest, but never the right one. Never the one that's the decision maker, not the one that we've offended. We'll tell another friend. We'll tell another coworker. We'll tell somebody else. We won't tell God. We won't tell that person, but we do so in hopes that we just might feel better. Why? Because guilt makes us feel lousy. It makes our imaginations go crazy, to run wild. It causes our confession to get misdirected, that we'll talk to anyone other than the one that we've actually offended. There's a final reason it makes us feel so bad, and that's because it results in our joy getting robbed. It results in our joy getting robbed. Well, they have confessed to the steward. They just said in verse 22, we don't know who put our money back in those sacks. And the steward says, listen, peace be with you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. So saying, guys, it's okay. It's okay. You know, nobody thinks that you've stolen. Then we're told that he brought Simeon out to them. All right, so now they've been all reunited. He brings them into the house. He gives them water to drink after this long journey. He washes their feet. He even gives food and water to their animals. In verse 25 it says, then they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon. They heard he would eat bread there, so everything is ready for this meal to take place. Verse 26, Joseph comes in, and when Joseph steps into the room, all of these brothers just bow down before him. Again, they don't know it's Joseph, but they know he's the number 2 man in Egypt. And as a sign of respect, they fall prostrate on the ground before him and showing him the respect due this position. And he looks at them. In verse 27, he asks, are you guys doing okay? He said, last time you told me about your father, is he still alive? Is he still doing well? And they said, yeah. And they said, you're serving our father. In verse 28 is in good health. He's still alive. And then in verse 29, Joseph looks over and he sees Benjamin, his mother's son. And he said, is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me? Now, again, he's playing dumb. He knows exactly who this is. Is this the one you mentioned? Well, yeah. Well, at this point, Joseph has to excuse himself. He has to leave the room. He is so overtaken with the emotion, the weight of all of this. I mean, not only has it been 20 years since he last saw Benjamin, but he had a special and a unique bond that he shared with Benjamin and none of the other brothers, because with the other brothers, they were his half-brothers. They had a different mother. But he and Benjamin shared the same mother. They are full brothers. These two were the apple of their father's eye. And he's seeing him now face to face for the first time in 20 years. It's just too much for him. And so he gathers himself. He comes back. And as he does as they do in verse 33, we're told that all these brothers sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, the youngest according to his youth. But what's interesting is how that verse ends. It says, and the men looked in astonishment at one another. They looked in astonishment at one another. So what's going on? You've got all these brothers sitting there with Joseph, and they're scared to death. What are they thinking? Well, at some moment, the other shoe is going to drop. The curtain is going to be pulled back, and then we're going to know exactly why we're in the prime minister's house. Because what if some bunch of brothers from Canaan, we have no business in a place like this with a man like this. Something terrible is getting ready to happen. So they're all bug-eyed looking at each other. Here's the question. Are they enjoying this whatsoever? Nope. Now, keep in mind where exactly they are. They're at Joseph's house, the prime minister of Egypt. Now, they're not in a camper somewhere, right? I mean, this isn't an apartment. This isn't even a house. This has got to be a palace. I mean, the furnishings have to be among the most expensive and regal looking in the entire world. This place is decorated to the nines, and the food that has been prepared, I mean, this isn't from J&S. This is the finest food that you can find. It's from K&W. No, I'm sorry. But the most amazing home that they have ever been in, before them probably the best, most exquisite food they have ever had presented before them, are they enjoying any of it? No. And why are they not? Ultimately because of the guilt that's still ruminating in their heart and their mind. It started with guilt over what they had done to Joseph 20 years ago, then guilt over the money, and it's kicked their imaginations into overdrive, caused them to confess to the butler, to the steward. And now they're in this most amazing of places, experiencing a once-in-a-lifetime type of opportunity, and they can't enjoy it for a moment because they are absolutely racked with guilt. When push comes to shove, that's really why guilt makes us feel so miserable, because it robs our joy. We can't experience the blessings of the moment and enjoy them. We can't seize opportunities necessarily that are even presented for us because we feel so blessed miserable. Because that's what guilt does. It causes our joy to get robbed. You and I have all, and you don't need me to explain this to you today, that guilt feels lousy. We've all experienced it to varying degrees. In all likelihood, you're going to continue to experience it in the years to come. And it does stink. It doesn't feel good. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, yeah, I think I'm going to feel guilty today. I mean, nobody wants that. We want to avoid feelings of guilt at all costs. We associate guilt as not being in the positive category, but in the entirely negative category, right? Though that's probably the category in the box that we would put it in truth, guilt's a very positive thing. A very positive thing, because it works like a warning light on your car, letting you know that there is a problem. Just this past week, I'd gone out, I was going to drive the van somewhere the other day. I get in, I put the key in, I crank the ignition, and once the van has turned on, I see that there's a little warning light that has popped up, and it's the one that indicates that there's low pressure in at least one of the tires. I get out and I look. The tire gauge in the van was broken. I couldn't check any of them. I don't see that any of them look low, and so I get back in the van. I'll head to a gas station and check them. And so I pull out of our street, and as I began to drive, the light goes off. I thought maybe that was just kind of a fluke. Maybe the change in temperature caused that sensor, or maybe it's a little too sensitive. Anyway, it didn't come on the rest of the day. I'm feeling great about that. A day or so later, I get back in the van. I crank it up. The light comes on. I thought, well, it'll probably go off in a minute. I leave the driveway. I go down the street, and it doesn't go off. It stays on. The entire time I'm driving, it stays on. I don't know about you, but something like that drives me crazy. Crazy. I can't see anything except that light. It's I'm like this. I don't know why, but I'm a little OCD when it comes to those things. That you want to ruin my day, you let me see a check engine light, because that's all I can see. And I'm driving along, and I can hardly pay attention to the speedometer, to a tree or a car, anything out in front of me, because all I can see is that light. And so you know what I did that evening? I headed to Sheetz to get some air to get that light off. Sure enough, my front left tire was down about 5 pounds. Put some air in it, the light goes off. All is well in the world again. But it was driving me crazy. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't focus on anything except that light. I had to get the light to go off. You know, in truth, guilt operates in exactly the same fashion. Your imagination begins to go wild, and you're imagining all these scenarios that are not, in fact, based in reality. You're trying to release the pressure by telling someone else. You can't enjoy the blessings of the moment. You're passing and missing out on opportunities because all you can see is what no one else can see, which is the guilt that's going on inside. And it feels so horrible. And all these good things worthy of celebrating, are going on around you, but you can't experience that. You can't smile at that. You can't experience joy in that because you feel just torn up and so weighted down by guilt inside. You want the light to go off. And that guilt's letting you know there's a problem. Something needs to be addressed. So how do you get the light to go off? You're probably familiar with this statement. It's simple, but it's altogether true. If we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. The light can go off. The joy can be returned. The imagination can be used to write children's books. You can get the light off, but only when the guilt is dealt with. Yeah, it feels lousy, but it lets you know there's a problem. My question for you this morning is very simple. In the dashboard of your heart, is there a little light flashing this morning? Do you want to leave with that light still on? Won't you bow your heads with me? You know, God was very intentional in how He wired us, how He crafted us. And guilt, as lousy as it feels, as unpleasant as we would describe it, it does accomplish a positive result. Lets us know there's a problem. This morning, maybe you would say that the light's going off in my mind, in my heart. I've been really feeling miserable, weighted down by the guilt over what I've done. Maybe it was towards a family member, co-worker, classmate. Maybe it wasn't necessarily against any of those, but it was against God. You crossed the line. You know what His expectations and standards were, but you just danced right across it. Maybe you've told other people, trying to relieve the pressure, you've gone to someone that was kind of like the steward, not a decision maker, not the one that's been wronged. Maybe God's telling you this morning, there's an individual that you need to go to make something right. When push comes to shove, each of our sins puts us in this boat. Do you remember David's sin with Bathsheba? He is vexed with guilt over this. One of the Psalms, as he's expressing his weight of grief over this, he says to God, against you, you only have I sinned. When push comes to shove, every sin, those against persons, other people, and against God, is a sin against Him. Is the light going off? Is it flashing in your heart and mind? Will you just come to Him in honest confession this morning so that the light can go off and the guilt can go? Maybe you need to come and kneel at this altar and have that type of conversation with Him. Maybe it's in your pew. Wherever it is, have that conversation. Maybe God's prompting you to make another decision. Perhaps it's to begin a relationship with Him or find out how you can do that. Will you come during this time of decision we're getting ready to have? Share that with me and let me begin a conversation with you to help you discover and experience what so many of us have already come to know and experience. Maybe you recognize that Gate City is a place that it's not perfect, but it's a place that God wants you to invest your life and your gifts and your talents to love and be loved, to encourage and be encouraged, to be discipled and advanced in your walk with God. Maybe today's the day that God's prompting you to become a part of this church family. Maybe there's something you just need to talk to God about. Maybe you just want to come and have an honest conversation with Him here at this altar. But God has spoken. He's spoken through His Word. He's spoken through His Spirit. The question is, what are you going to do? Lord, we want to thank You again for how You've made us. You've wired us to experience guilt, and though we can't stand that and it feels lousy, it is for our good. Lets us know that there's a problem with the hope that the problem might be addressed. I pray, Lord, that those that have the warning light of guilt flashing in their heart and mind will experience the promise of 1 John 1:9, that they will come and call their sin exactly what You call it. Don't minimize it, not trivialize it, but confess their sins and experience just how faithful You are to forgive them and to cleanse them from all unrighteousness and get the light off. As You've spoken to our hearts today, whatever decision You're prompting us to make, I pray for Your sake and for our good, Lord, we will make it. We ask this of You in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to ask if you would